Just go through who's here. So it's Mark Hookway, David Lowes, Tim Brennan, James T, and Norman. Right. Okay. So tonight we want to really discuss the main thing from a coach's education point of view is the 800 meters, which I think is a massive event and covers a whole range of different types of athletes. Anyway, let's get going. So we want to start on this big diverse event, the 800 meters, and I'm going to ask Norman to start the ball rolling. Norman?
Okay, yes, thank you, Neville. The 800, yeah, I've been lucky over the years to coach many talented athletes, over 800. I suppose it's inevitable when you're in a large city coaching, and you've been around as long as me. But the thing is, over 800, as you said, there's many diverse types. People have come to me as 400-meter athletes, failed 400-meter athletes, if you like, one or two of them, and thinking they could move to 8. And some have been successful, others not so. Others have come to 800 because they're very good on endurance, 800, 1500-meter type runners. And but the training for the three types, if you like, 4-8, 8, and 8-15, I've found personally hugely different. Usually different. I found particularly the difference between 8 and the 8-15 is not huge. There's some people who are not particularly great at 4, not particularly good at 15, not got great endurance. And then but when it comes to say the difference between the 4-8 and the 800 runners, it's a very, very wide spectrum, I've found, and I'd be very interested to hear what other people think of this in a moment. But I'll give one or two examples. And people may remember Anne Williams from some years ago. She was former English schools 400-meter runner, and she came to me at the age of about 24, and we started to get some winter work in. She got chicken pox, was wiped out for the following year, so she's almost 25, 26 by the time we discovered that she had got a bit of an engine. And by the way, she won't mind me saying it, but she needed to get in good condition. And I think she thought she was in reasonable condition for 400s, but for 8, she wasn't. Now, once we got into winter work, I thought I was going to have to be very careful with her, only gradually move into it. But it turned out she got an engine, and she quickly developed, and as an 800-meter runner, and eventually even went as far as winning a 3A title at 1500, and won I think it was a Diamond League event at 1500, and I think she ran 10k in about 33 minutes. In other words, she got an engine that she didn't know about. Now that is very, very rare though. The majority have come to me from a 400-meter background have been completely the opposite. They haven't got engines, have had to work very hard and slow work at building up some endurance for them, so that I could even term them as 400, 800-meter runners, probably only on a third of the mileage that the 1500-meter runners are on, and any more than that, they tended to break down. I found a lot of runners like that. Some of them have come to me from other endurance groups where they could only train with 8-15 type runners, and it just couldn't work for them. But they could still be quite successful. I just had to reduce the mileages, increase the recoveries greatly during the winter, and really attack endurance and speed endurance from another angle completely. They were the sort of people who couldn't even do too much running. I found that I was getting good results with them working on cross trainers, stationary bikes. Non-running endurance was really quite useful, but we could get there in the end, and I got them into to reasonable sort of endurance form so that they could handle 800-meter type training as we went into the spring. Maybe I'll stop there, Neville. I could go on all day, and I'd be interested to talk to other people. So the varied types can get there, but what I'm saying is that there are different routes in training to get to that mountain, completely different with the different athletes. Now in the UK, the vast majority of athletes have come from an 8-15 background, and there's not many who do move up from 4. In Europe, it's quite different. And I think I'd love to see us attracting more 400-meter runners. into training with us, because I think that, you know, there's a lot of promise there. And by the way, if you do look at some of the PBs of the all-time best from Britain, as you said, quite a few. And I know Mike Rimmer, who I coach, never ran 400s, mainly because they didn't want to get injured. They've got problems. So it'd be difficult to, with the UK ones, to make any sense of PBs, you know, to determine what type of athlete they were.
I think the 800, Norman, is probably the most intriguing event of all middle distance events in terms of training. You know, as you said, the 400 types, the 800 types, sorry, the 4 800 types, the 800 types, and the 815. And you've really got to nip that in the bud straight away. You've got to realize, you know, what type of training they can take, because I would imagine a lot of British endurance coaches keep them on pretty high, well, maybe not high mileage, probably that's the wrong term, but high voluminous stuff, as opposed to, well, I'll go back a step. The first English schools winner I ever had, senior boy, we worked it out. The highest week he ever did was 15 miles a week. Now, if you're on the track twice or thrice a week, the warm up and cool downs account for most of that, you know, but that's true. But he was very, very speedy, very speedy. But yeah, I mean, what I've noticed in my kind of role is taking photographs at the BMC Grand Prix, etc. I actually get more time to watch races. And I think from my photographic evidence, apart from one or two obvious ones, the ones in the lead at the bell are nowhere near at the front when it comes to the finish.
Well, maybe that's just down to conditioning, but I think I'd like to make another little point though, and it's this, that again, a number of the athletes like Rimmer and Williams, as she was, when they came to me, they were definitely more 4.8 than anything else.
Yeah.
But with training and conditioning over a couple of years, they changed and they developed to become 800, and then in certainly in Anne's case, became 815. So with conditioning and training, so it can change.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But it's getting there, getting them to that level, and that's the most difficult part. That's the job of the coach, to work out how to get them into that sort of condition, to move them along that sort of spectrum, if you like.
You see, John has said that Elliot Giles is a very relatively low mileage person. He claims he's running 20 miles a week. That probably is more when you get the warm down and warm up, I would say. But when he's those 20 miles a week, he's running them at 4:45 pace. He's in the gym 3 times a week, 1 heavy weight session and 2 others where he's doing different sort of things in the gym. He actually he goes in the swimming pool a bit, which is I can't remember the year, but the German Schulman, he won,
yeah,
he won the Olympics, and I've spoken to him, and when I spoke to the German coaches, they said, "Oh, he trains like a decathlete." Now, when I spoke to him, his longest run was 7 miles, and he was in the swimming pool every day. And he reckoned on doing 2K every day swimming, which is a bit unusual, but I mean, that's the way of building up endurance as well, isn't it, Mark?
Well, it can be for some people, Neville, but unfortunately, for some people, the water's cools them down, and they can't get the heart rates up. The 8:15 runner will struggle to get anything out of running water.
Because in the water, you only need half the time of recovery to start doing the next rep. Mark, you had 2 guys done 147, but from a physiological point of view, why did he never really beat his junior times? He did beat it, but he was looking so good at one time. He did sort of fade in the last bit, didn't he?
Yeah, look, he was, from the age of 12, 13, he was very, very strong, ahead of his age in terms of maturity. He, set a UK age 16 record of 148.2. He did that pretty much off natural talent and his own, physique. But, like a lot of teenagers, he, had other interests, so to speak. And it's very difficult, and I think anybody who's on the top of the pedestal, it's so easy to get knocked off and then get dispirited. Now, having said all that, and it's relatively well known, his track record over the years, even the last 2 or 3 years, and he's now 25, he's sort of had big gaps in his training and his lifestyle, the way he's operating and things like that. But he's actually put in his best ever winter, and he's been training with the likes of Dan Rowden in Dubai, because he trains with Dan quite a bit. And he's as fit as he's ever been. So all is not lost, but I wouldn't say it's down to what he was prescribed. It's what he didn't do that probably had the impact on his development more than anything. I think I feel a little bit of a fraud when I saw the names that came up here, because at Tunbridge, most of you will probably know, we're not a Harrier club, but our tradition's been in cross-country road racing teams and stuff like that. And we've had some really good track runners come through, but a splattering perhaps compared to what some of you have dealt with on over 800. We've probably had 5 or 6 that have broken 150, but they probably have come from the 815 background. People like James West, of course, who's done 334 for 15.
Sorry?
It's just we've had a splattering, and we've succeeded in getting to the 148, 149.
Let's bring it. Andy, are you there? Andy Henderson?
I'm here, yeah.
Andy, tell us about, there you are. Tell us about Alex then. I've always thought, and I've said to you before, I think she'd make a good 1500 meter runner, but she doesn't like 15.
It's not so much that she doesn't like 15.
He doesn't like her.
We've chosen the wrong. We've chosen the wrong races to go into. Confidence runner as well. So I'm trying to think now. So was it last? It was the year of the World Champs 2019. So when she went to Doha. So we tried a 1500 at Trafford, but that night things were running late. So she'd warmed up, and then we waited another 40 minutes, and it was quite cold. So she found it very difficult to get going and ended up with 4:16. And of course, she wasn't happy with that. So very demoralized off the back of that. So that's why 2 weeks later, I went to Dave Lowe's meet up in the Northeast, and we did an 800 instead, and just went back to the 800 because she just wanted to see where she was at. So, but again, we'd planned to do another 1500 in Germany, but it was one of the meets that had one of those big storms, and so it got cancelled, that meet, so we never got to do a 1500. But it is in our plans to do a 15 and focus on 15, but just the way things have gone, with the Olympics being postponed, and it's just put a spanner in the works, really, trying to go 15. But we're still, it's in our plans.
James, did you do many 8s?
Yeah, but not. I never took them as seriously as 1500. You get a bit pigeonholed, and you don't get offered lanes or races. That's the problem, and you probably should. There was probably a period where I probably should have knuckled down and did a few more, but you get an invite for another mile or a 15, and you choose to pay the bills. So I didn't get the most out of myself. I got an indoor senior bronze. So the year after I won the 3K, so not many have gone from 3K one year to an 800 senior bronze the next year. So probably showed my range in a little way.
But you was really mainly 1500. That was your event, really.
Yeah, I was too soft to move up the 5K and too not disciplined enough to run quick over 800. So
Are you coaching any 800 meter runners?
Yeah, listening. It's fascinating listening to all of you talking, because I can resonate with everything that everyone said. I think that there's people on here that have had really good success over 800s, which I haven't quite had yet as a coach. I've coached a 202 girl, and I've coached a whole load of 148 guys that have predominantly been 1500 guys, but we haven't cracked much more than that yet, which is still one of my kind of like need to do. But listening to Norman, I think that the reason why is I just think it's a fascinating event, the 800, that is so tricky to get right, the balance, even for the work that the 15 guys need to do into that event, into the action, the absolute 800, 408 guys and girls that that's their event group. I found it one of the hardest event groups to get absolutely right, just because I just think there's so many different components to it. If you gave me a miler or an 800-meter runner, I'd put my house on getting the miler right. The 800, I wouldn't back myself at the moment on that.
All right, Norman, I'd like to bring you back into it, because we now talk about perhaps one of the reasons why some of our runners, and I'm included in that, have not had the success that they've had at 800. It is really the physiological side, which when we look at it, the speed work that's required, when on the physiological side, 800 meters in a race could go up to 24 millimoles in the lactate, which is very high. Now, that's got to be worked upon in training. You can't just expect people to go into races and end up with lactic that high and expect to run the last 200 very well. And I think sometimes we look at it and we think, well, they're not finishing very well, but is that endurance, or is that speed endurance, or pure speed? What do you think, Norman?
Well, the 800-meter athlete, let's just talk about him or her. That Mike Rimmer he was 4'8", but he's really developed to become mainly just 8. He wasn't really good enough or consistent enough with the endurance to go to 15, and a few others. I really coached them to be reasonably sharp over 4. Coach them from around about March onwards, I would say, to be damn good over a K as well in training. I wouldn't take them a lot further because it would be too much for them. They wouldn't handle the work. So it was that range between 400 and a K. If they could run a good K, they would finish an 8 very well. If they could run a good 4, they'd handle the first lap no problem. So Rimmer, just occasionally, I know you'll see his PBs 3:38, but that's a one-off. He did once. He's more usually 3:45, but his basic speed work was terrific. I mean, he only ran a 400, I think, last 400 as a junior, and about 48.1. But he could well have run relay legs sub 45, I would have said. And in fact, some of the GB coaches have seen him doing a little bit of speed work and wanted him on the teams. But we didn't do it because we rarely went into the speed because of the injury problems he'd got with his back. He'd got severe back problems from childhood injury. And so I only, dipped into the speed work as often as I could, as often as his niggles would allow, but we would be touching, decent speed. I'd be touching quite regularly, 1,000 meter type sessions and getting him in training. He'd be running 220 for a K. And then obviously we're working on event specific 800 sessions as well. So if we could have done a bit more speed, it would have gone even quicker, but we had to be limited on that.
Championships are different to
well, in championships these days, I mean, in 30 years ago, it was 4 races. Now it's 3. You've got a day between race 1 and race 2, and then usually a day's recovery. 2 days, sorry, to the final. So it's not so bad. And again, standard 800 meter training should be, well, for me is about 1,600 meters of effort. So even in training, we're doing blocks of training where are more than equivalent to a one-off race, and then to give it somebody 24 hours recovery should be no problem. But really, but again, Rimmer was limited a lot of his career on the mileage he could do because of this, severe problems with his back. And so he listened to what his body was telling him, and again, he had to be careful. And that's why he also, a lot of his endurance work was done on cross trainers on the bike.
That's what Elliot does as well. He's doing one weights and then cross training and on the exercise bike as well. So
very useful.
Times, but it's such a different event, isn't it?
Well, I think, Neville, I've mentioned this to you before, that I had conversations with one or two of the top European 800-meter coaches, and they've said to me, in general, most of their athletes have come to them from a 400-meter background.
Yes.
So the question I've asked straight away is, well, how do you get endurance into them? How do you improve that side of them? And their arms go up in the air and they look up at the sky and say, it's a long, tough job with your 4.8 runner. It's a slow process, but they use cross trainers. They use stationary bikes, because running, the 4.8 runner, his heart rate can go up very, very quickly, break down easily. So if it's non-weight bearing, they've got more of a chance, as long as the athlete's wearing heart rate monitors and they're in the right range. And even rowing machines. Now, your 8:15 runner, he'd still get his heart rate up on a stationary bike. It's I'm sure James would agree with that. But same in water. But the 4.8 runner, there's lots of ways of approaching it. You're saying something there. What are you saying, James?
Yeah, I was saying, Brazier, the US lad that's tearing it up at the moment. It's interesting to hear that he does nearly most of his runs on the treadmill. And he won't go often. I think they were saying he runs an hour max, and that's the tops he'll go. But it's interesting when you start thinking about mechanics and you start thinking about controlling your variables and maybe that mindset of it. To most of our distance runners, the thought of doing a lot of your work on the treadmill would put them with fear. But the same principle applies to going on on the bike, on a stationary bike. I think Elliot uses one of those elliptigo bikes outside. You see him a lot using those. So at least he gets outside. But I think most of his kind of cardio stuff is non-impact. And I think it is. I think you're right. I think it's just the individual and getting that aerobic profile in, but without the impact, and also without impacting their mechanics. That's the balance. I think interesting it's about running in the water, and some that find some of the stuff we've done down here, and we've done some lactates on people in water running, and actually got some phenomenal numbers off people. When people have been injured, and actually, we've all probably had athletes that have done pool water running when they've had injuries, and especially, out and out 800 or speed guys, and they can really produce. And it's almost because the body can keep moving a bit longer in the water, whereas obviously on land, once you start to flood, you start to slow and you start to go. Whereas in the water, you can actually keep moving. So it's actually quite a nice, for those that are injured and can't do the speed work, you can actually get a good kind of lactate buffering profile in there in that period. But obviously it's not the same as running on the track, and so it's a balance. But sometimes it's a good alternative that they know at least they're getting some anaerobic work, whereas we tend to think about things like pool running or any kind of cross training, that it's all just aerobic, but you can do anaerobic work on there as well, especially on a spin bike as well, with HIIT sessions and stuff like that.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, we just think of, or generally think of in the pool is really aerobic. So what's your experience of anaerobic work in the swimming pool?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking, reps with, you actually said it earlier, the recovery, you have to bite into the recovery. We're not talking about long recoveries. But yeah, I mean, it could, even a minute hard in the water, but not on a lot of recovery in between. And we just found people's lactates will go over 20. Just from pool running. But then, it's not. It doesn't substitute that. It's a good kind of elastoplaster on if someone is injured and they're in that phase of training. Often you're trying to condition them back. But if it's a little bit more in season, you're still trying to get some stimulus in there. But yeah, so I haven't looked into it massively. I'd love to know if there are any more studies out there, because obviously, you know, it might be that we're missing a trick, or some people that it can complement other training, because if you can produce massive amounts of lactate without impact, or without, you know, I don't know, the detriment of once you know, in training, you've almost, you can't do too much after you've gone there, you know, whether it could complement training a bit. But yeah, that's another question maybe.
Yeah.
Of work has been done on that, James. I think it's one or two people have looked at various sports, and what they're basically saying is that all these other forms of cross training that we're talking about, they are really good substitutes for the endurance side, you know, for the aerobic work.
Yeah.
But for the event specific, you've got to be there on a track. You know, it's got to be, and it's the same in other sports. It's got to be event specific. So, but as you said, you could get something from, let's say, a maintenance point of view. Yes, you know, you could hold on to something there, I'm sure. But to actually get an advancement in fitness, you've got to be on that track.
I think sometimes there is a mental side of it as well, that if athletes think, you know, and they, you know, I think getting people, you know, especially when they are injured or in the water, and it's, you know, it's a bit soul destroying, isn't it? So I think sometimes maybe us and them think they're coming away with a bit more, maybe that psychosomatic placebo effect. Let's not rule that out a little bit. But yeah, I think you're right. I think nothing beats proper track work. I think, yeah. And I would have thought John and Elliot, yeah, great. The cross training complements it, but he's run 143 off the track work, isn't he? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Andy, any of your guys use the water much, or?
No, I was just going to say that we've started using just in the last summer Zwift, so crit races. So basically, they just short and sharp, really. So you're doing laps. I mean, it's 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and yeah, and then you're just accelerating, and because it's coming, you know, you have little races within the race, and yeah, so somebody like Alex Bottrell did a lot of that last summer. So and then we've managed to get down to 146 last year. So and the majority of the work was off Zwift racing. It wasn't till we got nearer the races starting that we actually then started to get onto the track. But he did build a hell of a lot of lactic in these sessions.
Yeah, that's, I think it's important. Do you get Alex to do that as well?
No, not done that with her. No, no.
Well, it leads on to the next question I'm going to ask is, what's the difference between men and women coaching 800 meters? You've got more experience there, Norman, yet again.
Well, I've got to say that not a huge amount. I mean, obviously there's a lot more, how can I say, you know, things you've got to take account of with the women, red S, you know, that type of thing. But let's just talk about the training. There's not very much really at all. They've all trained much the same way. And in fact, if anything, I'd say I've been lucky enough that the most talented women have been the toughest performers as well. You know, the most resilient within the group. You know, they've handled training probably better than anybody. But so there's not really any, you know, and I'm not particularly, but possibly the best women have been 8. Anne Griffiths ran about 4:07:15, but never really trained as an 8:15 runner. Whereas somebody like a Tom Lancashire, you know, he's running 3:33. He's getting up to 80 to 90 miles a week. Kevin McKay was up there. But all the best 800 meter females, they were probably in the range 60 to 70 miles a week in the winter.
But Kelly's very interesting. When I had a long discussion here with Arnold about
Dave
Kelly,
Arnold.
Yeah, about Dave Arnold, about Kelly's training. She was in the gym almost 2 or 3, at least 3 times a week. Very strong. Never run more than 40 minutes a day. Never, but always fast.
She ran 53.8 PB.
Oh, okay.
And she ran 9 minutes for 3K.
Yeah, well, that's not bad range, is it?
No.
Yeah. So she's
Neville, I would refute that she never ran over 40 minutes, because I did a few Sunday runs with her a lot longer than 40 minutes.
But she did run quick, didn't she?
Yeah, I think her army background. I mean, she was an army PT, wasn't she? So she came from that very well conditioned sort of background and self-mill. So I suspect that when she got back into athletics, she'd been based in West London because she was with Ealing and Southall, I think, when she was in the army, wasn't she?
Yeah, that's right.
She came back to Dave after that a bit, and then she was coached by Matola's coach, wasn't she? When she won.
Jennings. Jennings. Yeah. So, what about the thing we haven't touched on is technique. Do we do much on technique? As perhaps some of us used to or still do. How important is it?
There's quite a lot of work, Neville. Neville, been done by academics on the effects of strength work. You know, on not so much technique, but running efficiency.
Yes.
And there's obviously benefits there. And I think it's what you're talking about. You know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. With good technique, it's more efficient. It really is. And I mean, look now. This guy Donovan, he's got quite a good technique, hasn't he? Rudisha, beautiful looking runner, Rudisha. They came from a sprint background. Well, Rudisha came from a sprint family, didn't he? So he it was almost innate with him that he would have a good technique.
I think that's what people have got to train for. People, they say, "Oh, we're doing drills," and drills are great, but you're not doing drills under duress, and that's what you've got to get used to. I think what we're going to come on to is hill running, and hill running actually reenacts, to me, depending on what type of hill you've got, of course, is the lactate that you can experience over the last 120 in a 50 or an 800 meters. So, hills, I mean, I've wrote articles on this. I mean, there's so many very different hills you can do. But, I mean, hills, in essence, are speed work against the resistance. But they're so good for running efficiency and strength. I mean, one of the last conversations I had with George Gandhi was about hill running, and he said he preferred his athletes to do a said session, whether it was 12 reps, 16 reps, whatever. He wanted the same form on rep 1 as on rep 16, So even if it meant just reining the pace in a little bit, still run hard, of course, but maybe not just going flat out and flailing arms and, head down type of thing. Hold that form. And I think that's important.
So just the point here is that the divergence, well, not I don't think with the middle distances, but it's always felt that by the purists that you should do speed work at the beginning of a session.
Yeah.
Now, when you're fresh. Now, okay, I think David has hit on, you need to be that good at the end, don't you? So
well, it's defining speed, Neville. I mean, some people say they're doing speed when they're doing, 400, 600 meter reps. That's not speed, that's speed endurance.
Endurance, yeah.
I mean, one of the best interviews I've ever done, and you know about this, Neville, is with Peter Elliott. And I'll keep this short. I mean, when he used to train with Wilf Page, all they used to do was 150s, 200s, flat out. And Peter was always getting Achilles injuries, etc., And when he changed to Kim MacDonald, they worked out the fastest pace that he would ever run in an 800 meter race, which was the first 200. And that's what they based all the training around, sort of 23 seconds. And the speed work he used to do, the pure speed, was at the end of a session, which would be something like 10 to 12 flying 40s, where you're running and just boom, fast as you can, and a nice, easy walk back. And just as an aside, which has got nothing to do with speed work, when I interviewed him, Peter said all his runs out of the door were sub 5 minute miles. That was no warm up, it was straight into sub 5 minute miles. Now, I found that, well, not absurd, it's probably the wrong word, but strange, because being an ex-runner, I know how hard it is to get into sub 5 minute miles straight out of the door.
And that was Peter, wasn't it? I mean,
Neville, Mark's asked a few questions. Do you want me to answer some of those, Mark? Yeah.
Yeah, I really, of all of us, from what everyone said, I would say Andy and you, Norman, are the ones that have had the sharp end, top notch 800 meter runners. And James alluded to it, and I've alluded to it. It's just finding that little bit extra. And the questions I asked were firstly about hills, which Dave just mentioned. I've always sort of traditionally brought them in long hills, sort of November to, in December, and then got them shorter and shorter as we got through to the summer. Whether rightly or wrongly, that's the way I approached it. And then the other question was, I'd heard rumours that Michael Rimmer had run a 400 in about 50 seconds as part of his warm-up of an 800. So I'm intrigued about the warm-up. And then Norman, you mentioned the 1,000 metre time trial. And again, I think Dave was just talking about it.
Yeah.
Whether it's best to do some speed work after something like that or before something like that, bearing in mind what I just said about warm-up. So those are the 3 points that I...
Okay, well, I'll try and move through fairly quickly, Mark. The 1,000 metres, it wasn't so much a time trial. It was maybe a session. This would be, let's say, late April, maybe the middle of May. We're still working on that K, particularly, but it would maybe be a K, 15 to 20 minutes recovery, a 6, 15, 20 minutes recovery, a 3 or a 2. Now there, if you like, that's a little bit of speed under conditions of fatigue at the end of the session. But it would have to focus hard getting the 1,000 done, because the 6 and the 2 or the 3, it could take care of at any time, any day of the week. It wouldn't be a problem. But it's that K you have to really focus on. He's warmed up properly, carefully, really got himself primed. We've got 1 or 2 people helping out maybe, and to pace him so that he could get that right. That's a very difficult one to get right. And we'd be working on that from middle of March, really, all the way through to May to late May to get that K in place. It would take that length of time to get it right. And as I said, it'd always get a 6 and maybe a little bit of speed. Might even be a 6 and a 4, but with decent recovery in there. Now, in terms of the warm-up, he experimented really a little bit. What we noticed, and it wasn't just Michael, with all the athletes, if we're doing 2 sets, let's say an 800 metre session, 800 specific, let's say something like 600, 30 seconds 2, with maybe 20 minutes, and do the same again. So there's 2 sets in there. The second set would always be quicker than the first. Not much, but it would be. They'd feel better on it. And it's the same with most of the 800 metre type sessions. Even if it was 3 sets of something, the last one would almost be the best. And of course, you start asking the question, why? Now, obviously, there's been a little bit of work on oxygenation, if you like, oxygenating working muscles, etc. And so Michael and a lot of the other athletes did experiment, and quite a number of them continue to this day, certainly putting a 200 metres in. That 200 metres for Michael might be a 25, 26, nothing sparkling, but he put it in just a few minutes before he's ready to hit the rest of the session. And he experimented sometimes with races. Now, 50-second 400 for Michael was just a stroll in the park. For him, it's nothing, So he did experiment with that, and he did find something useful coming from it. The trouble is, to do that at a major games is extremely difficult. It's impossible. Yeah. So because you'd sometimes you'd warm up, as you know, the major games, you'd then be taken to somewhere under the stadium, and then you've got 5 or 10 minutes out on the stadium before you compete. So it didn't really take it through to major games. It's because it's difficult to put into place. But he did experiment with it, and it seems to work quite well. Now the hill work that we do, we're probably like you. We're starting as people are getting fitter by November, December. Once every 2 to 3 weeks, I'm putting hill work in, or I'm on a hilly loop anyway, doing endurance work. The hills might be 50 seconds long, 60 seconds long, maybe. Now the 800 metre runners, they're not doing a huge number. Might be doing 5 or 6 of those. But beforehand, we might have done 10 minutes, 8 minutes hard working on a hilly loop, then maybe 5 or 6 efforts over 60 seconds with a jog back recovery, and then straight into another 8 minutes fairly hard. That's a big session for, somebody even like a Michael Rimmer, but that's what he would be doing certainly into December. Now, once we, again, I'd be continuing with that sort of type of work, mixed work really, on a hilly area, hilly grass through January and February. And when I get to March, I'm probably certainly 1 week in, one Saturday and 2, sometimes more than that. I'm on a 30-second hill. Now this is a hill that you can sprint up. You know, so it's reasonably steep, but it's not affecting your style. You can still work at it. And I'll have to go and measure the slope of this, because I get asked this question quite often. And I've been using that same hill now for over 40 years. It works. You know, it seems to be right for them. And we start off with something like, for the 8:15 runner, it might be 3 sets of 9. It's a big session. 3 sets of 9 by 30 seconds, jog back recovery in maybe 70. And I've got grass at the side. So I'm sprinting up on tarmac, jogging down on grass. And I've got 5 minutes between sets 1 and 2, 6 or 7 minutes, that's all, between sets 2 and 3. The 800 meter runners, a bit less than that. You know, they're not doing such big sets. It might be, well, it might be 8 or 9. I think Diane, even one time, did go to 3 sets of 10, but it's getting a bit heavy, that, when you're in the middle of a big week. And then gradually, all the way through to May, I'm gradually scaling that back down, so that I've still got the same recoveries between sets, but the numbers in the sets will gradually come down to 3 sets of 5. And of course, they're quite a lot quicker. Now, I'll tell you where I stand on these, and it coming back to everything that's been said. I'll be at the top of the hill, and I'm really watching those guys over the last 10 meters, because that's where the form falls apart, like it might in an 8.
Yeah.
And I'm shouting at them, I'm grabbing hold of them afterwards, saying, your form went, you know, you've not got your elbows in, you're not keeping it together. So that's where you've got to be.
Yeah. Let's move on a bit. It's interesting you talk about that, the recovery. Michael's, you've never been worried about too long a recovery. I see that when you talk about your 1,600, 400 session, Michael,
Well, it's 20 minutes, Neville. It might be more even in the summer.
Right. Yeah. What does other people think about that? Makes it a long session, but you get the benefit from that.
Yeah, I'm starting off with 15 minutes in April, but I'm going to even late March, but I'm going to 20-25 minutes by the time we get into middle of May, and it's going much quicker.
So the quality is there more than the quantity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about? I mean, David talks about arm strength is low in many cases, and obviously working on the hills can be advantageous. But what about weight training? Anybody want to comment on weight training? What they do? How many times they go in the gym in a week?
And I'm sure James and Mark may have, and Andy have something to say on this. But my athletes from October onwards will be doing 2 circuit endurance sessions a week. And the endurance strength conditioning circuits.
That's not weight. I'm talking about a weight session.
Yeah, wait a minute. This is part of the conditioning, and then they'd go into that. One of those would convert later, maybe December, to a weights session, and but we'd only be doing squats and cleans in that. We won't be doing upper body work. That there's enough in the strength conditioning for that, because at the end of the day, you don't need to have superior strength in the arms, as long as it's strength endurance.
Yeah. But if you're doing cleans, you are actually using your arms as well.
Yeah, but you're not getting the weights above your shoulders, obviously. So
cleans are really for the legs, same as the squats, same as most of them. And usually 800 meter runners are very much stronger in the legs, particularly the women. That's where you notice the strength for our women are much stronger. The 800 meter runners, I guess with a lot of athletes you've got, if you put 2 together and you put women together, 800 meter runners against some of your longer distance runners, they would be more impressive with the weights.
Right. We do 2 weight sessions a week, and then at the start of the winter as well, we're also doing a circuit session on top of that. Eventually, as I get through to December, some of them we take the circuit out, and you just end up doing your 2 weight sessions. But then some of the athletes, there's a handful of them. So one of them's Laura. We'll also do a 3rd session, but that's more of an auxiliary type session where we're trying to work on the little things that cause problems, and we just try and strengthen those areas and stuff as well. So, but we keep 2 gym sessions even throughout the summer as well.
All right, good,
Trying
good.
to maintain all of that, you know, so you probably just reduce some of the volumes in the sets and maybe some of the weight and stuff, but we're always doing it. But you know, again, with I think people are too worried about trying to, you know, getting big and stuff. If you do things right, you're not going to get bigger, even though you're lifting big weight, because they do at the start and middle of the winter, we're lifting big weights, but you're just going through the different phases of the strength, eventually getting to the power end of stuff, and then just trying to get things moving quicker, especially with your 800 guys as well. And things become a little bit more explosive, especially as you start getting towards the summer season. And that's what we look to do. So as long as you've got things in place to go through the necessary progressions, then I think, you know, weights has become a big part of our you know, training, and not just about getting stronger, but also trying to prevent injuries as well. And we work on key areas, hamstrings, calves and Achilles areas, and we see them as, you know, the problem areas within our event group as well. And you know, I'm quite lucky to have an S&C coach that also helps, but he comes from an athletics background and he's more interested in the athletic side of stuff. So we can sit down and talk about specifics and areas that we're going to work on.
Good.
I agree with you, Andy.
Do we keep some of this strength going, work going that we pick up in the winter through the summer? I know with races it's difficult, but do we continue on the hills? Do we continue in the gym a bit?
A small amount, Andy, Neville, I do. I'm the same as Andy, I'm almost identical actually, but possibly not 3 sessions a week, but probably 2 in the winter.
Yeah.
In the summertime, oh yes, strength conditioning work we're doing. It's not a huge amount, and occasionally hill work, but it might be a little different. It might not be reps. It might be for a different reason. You know, I've found quite a lot of value in just shorter hills, doing some, and it's,
Sure.
I don't know, somehow there's been 1 or 2 athletes who's haven't got the muscle fibers twitching quite as well as they should sometimes, and they get something out of just 5 or 6 hills of about 8 to 10 seconds with a walk back recovery. It's not even it's a bit of extra, you know, and but it somehow seems to give them a sort of good stiffness in the leg.
Yeah, I mean, to back Norman up on that, I think sometimes I've thrown hills in over the summer, like almost sometimes a different stimulus, or also sometimes for people that their track season isn't quite happening how it's happening, and they've just been session after session, race after race, and you can see, but you know there's more in there. And so taking them away from the track, you know what you're going to get, you know it's different resistance, and sometimes actually take them to and do, you know, it wouldn't be obviously a winter type session, but it might be on a hill they've used in the winter, and they can feel themselves running faster. They know, because you know they're in shape, but often they're just getting a bit ground down by the track. And actually they come away from it. You look at Tony Whiteman's stuff when he, you know, his Masters record years, he was throwing in quite a lot of hill sessions in there as well. Interestingly, and I spoke to Tony about that, and it was actually stuff that he was doing back in the day with, you know, with Alan Story and different. So, you know, it blends in there quite nicely. You know, just complements. You know, it's just a different venue sometimes and a different stimulus. And you're right, you know, it gets a bit of stiffness in the ankle again. You might focus on a bit more about form, and then you get them back to the track, and it's like yeah, again, the handbrake's off again when you're back on the track, and you sometimes get that hunger back and that little bit of spring back off the track. So it can be quite an effective way.
Yeah, what I found, James, is that I probably get the best results in the summer with it's a hill with a flat 20-meter approach.
Yeah,
and then they hit the hill, and it's not that steep again, but and it's only for, as I say, maximum probably 8, 9, 10 seconds, and but it's that 20-meter approach is also useful, so that they're really motoring when they hit it, you know, and some of the stiffness is sometimes in the quads and hamstrings, you know, glutes. But it's a good stiffness that they end up getting, you know, the next day and 2 days later, it's still there. Okay, Neville, thank you.
brilliant.
Okay,
Thanks everyone.
no problem. I'll be in touch regarding all those things that we discussed. But thank you very much for
Take
taking
care, everyone. Have a nice
Okay.
night.
Okay.
Take care. Ta-ra.
Bye, everybody.
Take care. Take care. Bye.